Welcome to my 2025 multimedia presentation of my major work construction. I began the construction of my major work during week 5 of term 2. To start the project, I marked out the pieces I needed and had my teacher cut them out on the table saw. After having Sir cut out my pieces, I ended up with 8 individual pieces. They were my base, my cabinet pieces, and the top. I began sanding each piece so they were smooth all round. I used a sheet sander to help speed up the process. With my project now started, it was time to start designing the plinth, which will hold the cabinet and create the floating effect. Here, you can see my initial thoughts on how it will be laid out. I marked out where the plinth will go and how far it will be from the edges. I then had Sir cut out another board of timber to create 4 strips which were for the plinth. I then took the 4 strips to the table saw and set it to a 45-degree angle where I had Sir start to miter each end. After they were completed, I laid them out onto the base and test to see if they fit together. The next week arrives and it's finally time to mark, drill and screw the plinth into the base. Using precise marking out, I was able to align the 4 strips evenly around the base so it was symmetrical. I then drilled and screwed each strip in. We then began to start to miter the cabinet base, top, walls and faces. After they were completed, the 2 side walls and back face each got a rebate joint made on the table saw as well. Here I was marking out the holes needed to drill the dominoes into the side pieces and back face. After they were drilled, I tested out if they fit and how it looked. I then proceeded to grab a scrap piece of timber and test to see if the biscuit joint will work on my cabinet top. After successful testing, I began to mark and drill out the biscuit joints into the cabinet top. Now having the joints ready, it was time for assembly. We first made some support blocks on the table saw with scrap timber to use with the strap clamps, which is what we use to clamp the cabinet together. After setting up the straps and supports, I glued the dominoes and biscuits in and assembled the cabinet. This was probably the most nerve-wracking part, as one wrong move could damage the miters and the look. Assembling the cabinet was a struggle. After assembling the cabinet together, we put on the supports and strapped the clamps and tightened it. We then let it sit and dry. After getting some feedback from my teachers, I decided to add a plinth onto the bottom of my base. I marked out and had Sir cut some boards to create 4 strips again. I then mitered each strip and created a housing joint in the middle of 2 of them. Then I proceeded to clamp, drill and screw them into the base. With the cabinet, the end grain is appearing on the drawer side, so Sir cut out very thin strips of timber on the table saw. We then mitered the pieces, but ran into a problem. They were too thin, so we got a block of timber and used it to help miter the strips again. I then sanded them to fit the face and glued and taped them on. After acquiring some pine wood, I was able to begin building my drawer. I marked out the pieces and had Sir again cut them out on the table saw. I used the drop saw to cut them to the appropriate size, then went over to the table router to start the dovetail joints. After completing the dovetails, Sir corrected them on the table saw and cut out a strip for the base to slide into. We then put it together and tested to see if it works. We then went back over to the table saw with some plywood and cut out the base for the drawer. After fitting the base into the drawer, I pulled it apart and started to glue the dovetails together. I then clamped it and let it dry. The next day I proceeded to sand the drawer. It's week 10 now, and I'm now up to drilling my cabinet to the base. We first aligned the cabinet up, then clamped it down. We put it on some stools, and from underneath I drilled up and screwed the cabinet and base together. I was very pleased with the result after screwing it together. Now having the cabinet on the base, it's time to screw on the push to open drawer runners. I first marked out the depth of the runners, then drilled and screwed the runners on. I then marked, drilled, and screwed the runners onto the drawer, then slid it into the cabinet. I then tested to see if the push to open function works, and it did perfectly. During the holidays, they opened up the workshop for 3 days. I came in the first day to attach my drawer face onto the drawer. When trying to trim the face to fit, I split the wood so I had to get Sir to cut another face. I then used double-sided tape to hold the face, which was aligned with the cabinet, then marked, drilled and screwed the face on. I then went on to make a small plinth that attached to the cabinet top. This is what the very top piece will sit on. I marked, drilled and screwed this piece of timber on. After changing the design from a metal leg to a wooden one, I'm marking out the timber needed to create it. I had Sir cut the pieces out on the table saw. Then we mitered them on the drop saw. After the pieces were completed, I put dominoes into them. Now that's currently where I'm up to with my project. I have only the legs to put on, the top, and then stain and varnish the job before handing in. Thank you for watching Jaden's multimedia presentation.